Good day, duelists! Welcome to the tournament report for IDC41. As a reminder, I posted the deck profile for this tournament in an earlier video, link will be in the description. I played 40 card Fortress Burn and placed 3rd. And in this video, I want to go over all the matches one by one and take a look at interesting or key moments. Again, this video will be focused more on the competitive Duel Master scene, so if that's not your cup of tea, that is perfectly fine, I'm just letting you know in advance. Also warning, if you are easily triggered by misplays, this video might be difficult to watch. So, first match of the tournament was against Bunny. He's playing Rab Control, and this deck was surprisingly annoying to play against because of all the ramp and discards. But I also misplayed a lot, especially in game 1, so I get a Lost Soul in, which is always nice to see. But then he top decks a Prometheus, which is a scary threat to face, and here there's an argument to be had about swapping the Prometheus for a Surfer to get rid of it, but I decided to let it be and go for a Fortress play instead. The reasoning was that I need to start burning if I want to ever win here, and I'll probably draw removal at some point, but looking back at it, maybe it was better to play it safer. Anyway, I do end up drawing a Terror Pit, so in the end I killed the Bolme, and I only lost 4 shields for it. Fast forward a little bit, the game goes on for a while and opponent uses Plague targeting Fortress and my Plague. And I took the Fortress to hand, which I think was another misplay since I already had a Fortress in hand and having a Plague back would unlock 2 colors of mana, and this next turn was arguably the worst played turn of the whole tournament. Here I played Belix and took back Soul Swap, which was correct, but then for some inexplicable reason I stopped. I mean, in theory 1 blocker is enough to survive, but my turn should not have ended there. I had so many follow-up plays. For example, I could swap in Fortress Shell to burn 2 mana and then swap Belix back in and take back another swap. I would be in the same situation but with my opponent having 2 less mana. If I taken back the Plague a couple of turns back, like I said, I could even swap Fel and go for a Plague play next turn. And next turn as well, I draw a Darkness mana, so here I can go for a swap Fel Plague turn. But for some reason I decided to overly rely on this 1 blocker for survival, and guess what happens, next turn the Belix gets removed and that's it, I lose. Note that even then he wouldn't have been able to play the Surfer if I'd gone for the free extra burn the turn prior. Just overall a horribly played duel that I could have probably won, but definitely deserved to lose. Game 2, Bunny got double ramp into Lost Soul, but because I went first and because I knew Lost Soul was coming, I kinda managed to dump my hand a little bit, and the clam draw on the following turn almost equalized the situation, and eventually after a long and drawn out game I managed to win with just a couple of cards left in the deck. Game 3 was much less interesting. Opponent went first, had double ramp into Lost Soul again, and I didn't have any plays, and no clamp to punish it. Funny story though, I drew 1 extra card by accident instead of hitting end turn, and that 1 card was clamp. And I very frustratingly had to put it back, knowing that if that clamp had shown up just 1 card earlier, I would have won the match. But alas, I lost, and we're starting out the tournament 0-1. Second round was against Shabam, and well, when your opponent is on 50 cards and they open up with 3 Bronze Arm Tribes, you know it's gonna be a hard game. So once again, we are facing double ramp, but thankfully now I have the clamp to punish it, discarding my opponent's entire hand and putting them in top deck mode. So 1 turn passes and I play a Skysword to ramp, and Shabam draws Miraculous Rebirth to get Mistrias, which was probably the single best top deck you could draw there, and now there's an argument here for charging Fel and swapping in Fortress, but leaving my top decking opponent a Mistrias on board while emptying my own hand sounds like a recipe for disaster, so I ended up swapping out his Rias instead. And next turn I end up drawing and playing Energy Stream into another Energy Stream, and with 4 cards in hand, I'm like, we're back baby, let's go. Next turn I'm starting out the burn engine and it's looking good, and Shabam top decks Fighter Dwellfang, which ramps him up by 2 mana, which is very annoying when trying to burn the opponent's mana. But no matter, just stick to the plan and play Fortress Shell, and here I probably should have burned the Darkness mana, but I was scared of Mistrias, which could also be swapped in, so I destroyed the light mana instead. Which is still good as long as my opponent doesn't top deck exactly Lost Soul this very turn. But that's exactly what happened. And yeah, after that it was just GG. Game 2 again, my 50 card opponent has 2 Bronze Arm Tribes in starting hand, and a couple of turns later he gets the 3rd one as well, with the swapped Rias along the way. And here this time around it was probably correct to swap out the Rias, but I already was so far behind that I thought maybe I could fish for Darkness Mana and play Lost Soul. Unfortunately I did not get the Darkness Mana on 7 and yeah, that was it. Game was over next turn because of some random slash and burn plus Searing Wave shenanigans. So I'm down 0-2 in the tournament so far, and for people who don't know how IDC works, the long and short of it is that the probability of making top cut starting from 0-2 is something like 1% or lower. But I kinda felt like the deck itself was not bad, I was just misplaying it a bunch and I was losing to just random bullshit, and thus I was determined to play on. Round 3 we're up against some Hydra Hurricane deck, but this one was very special because it also had Arcbind, which I hadn't seen before in a tournament. Now HH is one matchup where I think the 40 card version is ever so slightly worse, because not only do you have less options to get rid of Misthias, but also HH can summon chump blockers even on 1 mana, so you really need to know when to start going in to avoid taking out. Anyway, first game started out rough, facing both Ice Vapor and Gigazoid at the same time, but somehow I managed to come back and squeeze out a victory with just 1 card remaining in deck after I draw for turn. Game 2 was more or less uneventful, double Misthias forced me to play very reactively, and I did not manage to get my burn engine going on time, and yeah, that's just it. Game 3, the deciding duel, I had double ramp into Lost Soul, but I did not have Darkness Mana for Lost Soul, second time that happens if you've been keeping track, and no Water Mana for Plague either. And this was not an easy decision, but I ended up charging the Lost Soul and going for Fal Iga, because this way I can at the very least swap in Fortress next turn if I don't draw Water Mana. And at this point I'm feeling sort of confident I can get my burn engine going on next turn, and my opponent is only at 6 mana. And then I get hit with a card that I never thought I would see. Glory fucking Snow. This card lets you ramp 2 mana if you have less mana than the opponent. What a useful card against the mana burn deck. And at this point I'm like, oh no, I'm about to lose to random bullshit again. And especially after getting my soul swap discarded and being left empty-handed, it's starting to look rough. But I have one top deck to make it count. Lost Soul! So yeah, after this Lost Soul we're back. And here the most ridiculous play sequence happens. Opponent summons Misthias and I top deck a Spiral Gate. Really not the best answer, but I can't allow that to stay on board, so nah. Then my opponent replays Misthias, and I draw another Spiral Gate. And of course my opponent summons Misthias again, and no more Spiral Gate, I just brick. And at this point I'm thinking, it's over man, there's no coming back from this. But thankfully a Terror Pet on my Fal Iga enables my Morbid Medicine, so I have a Miraculous Plague for next turn, only for it to get promptly discarded by Gigabauza. The thing is though, I started to notice that my opponent was getting a little overzealous on Misthias draws, coupled with the Glory Snow top decks, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe I can play for deck out myself. So that was the new plan. From that point onward, I just had to stall for time and make sure I always have at least 1 card more in my deck than my opponent. And that's exactly what I did. And a whole bunch of turns later, and after some potential misplays from my opponent, he ended up conceding because he was going to lose the deck out race. Notably though, I only had 1 card more in my deck, so theoretically I won both games in this match with just 1 card remaining in deck. 40 card power! 1-2 so far, going into round 4 against Chewbaca, he's playing a Fire Dark Nature, Mikey's Pliers aggro deck. And in this match you really see the power of Spiral Gate. Spiral Gating threats on turn 2 sets aggressive deck behind so much tempo and buys you so much time. Here in hindsight I think I should have charged Energy Stream to have mana for both Clamp and Spiral Gate, but alas next turn comes around and I play Sky Sword into Spiral Gate, and here I remember thinking I really need this shield to beat Terror Pit, because if Galsha gets to attack I lose my Sky Sword, which I really need for Soul Swap plays, and it's just a disaster. So I was just praying for a Terror Pit shield, and what do you know, I get a Terror Pit shield, and I remember thinking, okay, maybe luck is coming back around. From here on it's just a straightforward Fortress game, spam plagues, burn mana and eventually win the game, nothing special. Game 2, let's just skip ahead a little bit. I got to this point and it's like, you have 2 plays to stay alive, you either Sky Sword plus Soul Swap or Sky Sword plus Spiral Gate. The problem with Sky Sword plus Soul Swap is that you need to charge the other Soul Swap, plus it lets Gyalshak attack freely and kill the Sky Sword, and you also risk getting multi-bricked with the Skysword charged, which won't leave you enough mana for the swap. So like, the clear play here is to go Skysword into Spiral Gate, but for some inexplicable reason, I ended up going Skysword Soul Swap, which like, if this was any other creature, it wouldn't have been that bad, but the fact that my Skysword dies to Galshak here is just game losing. And I instantly realized this and I was like, what the fuck am I doing? I just threw the game. I was so distracted and mad at myself that I even forgot to bounce mana with Plague, which is mandatory by the way, like you're not allowed to do that, and that would have bought me another turn. Overall, another game which I definitely could have won with proper play, but lost because of my own misplays. I want to underline that these losses are really not the fault of the deck itself, but rather my inability to pilot it properly. Game 3 was very long and drawn out, largely due to my opponent running heavy ramp cards in like Fairy Life, Bronze Arm Tribe and Windax, making it difficult to bring his mana pool down. In the end, here I decided to attack early, as in my opponent was on 6 mana still, but I realized I'm never fully burning him down from this position with 7 cards left in deck, and if I waited a couple more turns he could swarm the board and retaliate in case of triggers. So I think this play was correct, and yeah, I ended up winning a couple turns later. Round 4 was a very interesting one. I'm playing against Defendo, piloting a deck running Mana Bonanza and Bliss Totem, which is unsurprisingly considered to be pretty good against Mana Burn. If Mana Bonanza resolves once, the match is just over for me. Also, if Bliss Totem is allowed to stay on board, even for one turn, it becomes almost impossible to win. So the game plan is clear. Burn his mana fast before he can get to 8, and always keep at least one removal option in hand if he reaches 6 mana. With that game plan in mind, the game starts, and well, not only does my opponent win the die roll, which means he gets to go first, but I should mention that his deck is 60 cards, since you need the deck to be chunky to sustain the self-mill from Bonanza, and mine is 40 cards as we've established. And yet I don't get my Bronze Armor 3, and he does. 2 of them! And at this point, if I didn't have Cranium Clamp in hand, the duel would have just been over. But thankfully the clamp is there this time around to punish the double ramp, and because of the MVP clamp I am actually in a great spot. Except my opponent plays Crystal Memory and gets to pick one card from his deck and add it to his hand, and for some reason I thought for sure this was going to be Bliss Totem, and because of my bad read I get completely wrecked by Lost Soul next turn. It happens, but the duel is not over. He needs to draw his Bonanza and or Bliss Totem, and it's not necessarily easy in a 60 card deck. Consistency matters. He finally draws his Bliss Totem, but of course now I am prepared. I thought about swapping it out for a Bloody Skeeto, but after burning his mana he no longer has any nature, so I figured it's pretty safe to just bounce it back with Spiral Gate. I'm already on 12 cards though, so I feel that clock ticking. But alas, I know that top deck quality is crazy good with this deck, so a couple draws later I managed to burn most of his mana and finish the game with plenty of time to spare. Game 2 was pretty straightforward to be honest, it was just a case of making sure to have removal in hand for Bliss Totem, and then just snowballing from there with some quick mana burning. Really not much else to say about this one. So we're 3-2 going into the final Swiss round, and this final round will decide whether we make top 8 or not. We're up against Nasus on Waterfire Rush with Spin Slicer, and I think this series shows Spiral Gate is just such a crazy good card against aggro. You can see it coming together here, bouncing one attacker to hand while the turn 3 Bronze Arm Tribe kills the other one. It's just beautiful. Fast forward a little bit, there's this interesting board state where he's at 0 mana, but I'm also completely out of cards and he has 3 attackers to my 4 shields. So if he summons a Braidclaw, he's 4/4/4 and I could be in trouble. He could even poke once with Cook Polon and set up lethal if I don't draw removal. So I decided to go in to end the game before that happens. In hindsight though, I should have maybe been more patient and trusted that my top deck quality was good, because I hit the first shield Surfer and my heart immediately sank. This was bad. No Braidclaw thankfully, so he has to poke with Cook Polon once to set up the lethal, and as luck might have it, the shield is the best card in the deck for this situation, Miraculous Plague. And from this point onward the duel is just over. Notably though, even without the Plague, even the Spiral Gate that I top decked was good enough to keep me in the game. Anyway, moving on to game 2, I just get completely ran over. Spiral Gates managed to stall the game a little bit, but not enough to prevent the loss, and so we quickly move on to game 3, and this is a scenario that I've gone over in my head like 20 times before the match itself. Against this deck, do you Spiral Gate the Aqua Guard on turn 1? If I had Bronze Arm in hand, it would have been pretty clear, as I would have had a nice 2-3 curve, but like this, maybe it's worth saving it for a potential 2-drop. But then I thought, if he's playing this on turn 1, there's a very high likelihood that he has Spin Slicer in hand, and like, if I Spiral the Spin Slicer, it doesn't do shit, because he just replays it on 3 mana after having already taken a shield. Plus, if I Spiral Gate the Aqua Guard, it makes his turn 2 very awkward because he needs to spend mana inefficiently to replay it. And I ended up going for it, and I think this was definitely correct, and fast forward a little bit, I ended up winning the game off the back of that play. Even my opponent said in chat that the turn 2 Spiral Gate might have just won the game by itself. So this once again shows the true power, the strength Spiral Gate has in this deck. Phew, and with Swiss rounds out of the way, we are on to top 8. In my group of 4 we have Agabert, my girlfriend and my love, on Ruby deck out, Spoding on Survivors, and then Bunny, my opponent from the first round of the tournament, and I was very much looking forward to this rematch. First round against Agabert was very uneventful. I mean, Fortress Burn traditionally crushes deck out, and with 40 cards it's a bit trickier because you're decking out faster, but the matchup is still favored for Fortress. And this match was just a stomp. Like, I'll play it in the background in case you want to slow the video down and watch it, but there was nothing of note going on here, and this video is already turning out way too long, so let's just move on. Next up, the long-awaited rematch from round 1 against Bunny's Rap deck. Now, as we've learned from game 1, Lost Soul Race is super important in this matchup, so the best thing you can do in this matchup is double ramp into a 7-cost spell, and we have the Bronze Arm Tribe on turn 3, which is the first ramp, and then once again we see the importance of having Spiral Gate over Aqua Surfer in this game, because Spiral Gate can be a ramp spell after you've played Bronze Arm. Usually you would need a Skysword or Soul Swap to ramp up the second time, but with Spiral Gate you also have the option of bouncing and replaying Bronze Arm Tribe, which is exactly what I did. And from here on I have Lost Soul and Double Plague and Fortress spam, and there's just no coming back from that. It's an easy win, all thanks to that Spiral Gate. Game 2 I just had no plays, and my opponent ramped to Lost Soul first, followed it up with the Prometheus, and I mean that was that. Not a very interesting match. I mean, like I said at the start, whoever gets to Lost Soul first probably just wins. Game 3 I once again missed my Bronze Arm Tribe, but my opponent missed his ramp as well, so we're on even footing. In this position I was actually worried he might attack. I think it's arguably correct to attack here because there's 3 creatures on board and stalling the game against Fortress Burn will not end well for you. But alas, no attacks, and so I'm free to ramp up to Plague and then start the Fortress Burn spam, and yeah, that's pretty much game. I think in general, as long as Rob doesn't fast ramp into Lost Soul, and as long as I don't misplay like an idiot like in round 1, I have a pretty easy time against it. And so we're going to the last round of top 8 group stage against Spoding's Grip Survivors. This is the one matchup from this group I was particularly worried about, because Survivors in general can run over Fortress Burn. If they manage to get their engine going, it's very difficult to stop it. But on the flip side, if I manage to ramp up to Plague quick enough and start the mana burn spam, Survivors can never get their engine started. And it turns out with 40 cards with a pure focus on burn, that happens quite consistently. I do want to point out some small misplays though. Here I use Miraculous Plague, and I really shouldn't have given him the Soul Swap for mana. I thought that I don't want to give him Skysword because I don't want him ramping back up, but I mean, with swap he can replay his Skysword anyway. I could have quite safely given him a Blazazor or even the Gargantua because he's never reaching 6 mana here. Oh, and one more thing, if you've watched the deck profile, you might remember that this deck has no way of dealing with Petrova, and the only strategy is to completely ignore it and focus on removing the other threats. And I think this game is a good example of that. I want you to keep your eyes on this Petrova here. It will stay there on the board until the very end of the game, and it will manage to achieve absolutely nothing in the process. So this game, and some others after it, are a good example of why Petrova is not really an issue, even if the deck has 0 answers to it. On to game 2, once again you'll see an example of Petrova summoned early that managed to have almost no impact. Here once again we see why Clamp is so strong, discarding Spoding's whole hand, and at this point I think the game is already won, especially seeing how I have Plague follow up next turn, so I'll just fast forward here. This game was a pretty easy win. And so we ended up group stage 3-0, feeling confident, and we're on to semifinals where we face Solomon on Fire Nature Rush. And most of you watching will know that FN Rush is one of the worst matchups for traditional Fortress Burn, because it's just so damn fast you oftentimes don't have enough time to execute your game plan. And for 40 cards it's no different. The matchup is not horrible. I mean, I did about 30 matches, which is 70 duels worth of testing, and I ended up with a 43% probability of winning the match, which, I mean, it's bad, it's under 50%, but it's not unwinnable, it's not 2080 or something like that. But you really need a combination of Beric Spiral on turn 2, Bronze Arm Tribe on 3, Skysword swaps and or many triggers. So the game starts and I already made a very small misplay. Pause the video and see if you can spot it. The correct play here is to charge Skysword because you want your nature mana on turn 3, so you want Skysword in your mana zone. But if you draw Spiral Gate here, you really want to play it. But if you play it, you can't charge Skysword on turn 1 because it enters tapped. So you want to charge Skysword turn 1, and then if you draw Spiral Gate, you can charge the energy stream to play it. Plus, Skysword also allows you to play Berics on 2, though it's debatable if charging the Bronze Arm Tribe for that is even worth it. But anyway, I didn't draw either Spiral Gate or Berics, so it didn't end up mattering, but it's still a misplay. And my FN Rush opponent has turn 1 Deadly Fighter into turn 2 Poisonous Mushroom plus Sniper Mosquito, which, for those that don't know, this is the absolute nuts opener. FN Rush has many good openers, but this one is the best one you could possibly have, at least against Fortress Burn. And so this is already terrible. I didn't have Spiral Gate, he gets the nuts, and this is just really not good. And this situation is interesting because if I had 1 light mana in my entire 8 card hand, I could have played Berics and Camp here and maybe hold on with 1 trigger, but like this it was just not happening. We get a Terror Pit trigger, but it's just too little too late, though notably 1 turn earlier and it would have been enough. So the game was surprisingly close. Spiral Gate or light mana for Berics, or having the pit 1 turn earlier, or him not having the nuts draw would have won, but it is what it is. Game 2 I got Berics on turn 2 and he also bricked his 1-drop, which makes things pretty easy for me. But again I made a misplay that almost cost me the game. Here I can charge up to 6 mana, which means I have guaranteed Plague next turn, and against FN Rush if I manage to cast Plague even just once I instantly win, especially since I have a second one to follow up. So here I can just play it patiently, charge Berics, maybe Spiral Gate the Braidclaw just to be extra safe, and just set up for a Plague victory next turn. But instead I summoned Berics, which delays my Plague by 1 turn, and not only that, I go for Energy Stream from mana instead of Spiral Gate, because I figured Braidclaw will die into Berics anyway. The problem of course is that FN Rush does run blocker removal, so my Berics is now gone, which means it could get really ugly. Thankfully a Spiral Gate trigger is there to alleviate some of the pressure, and like yeah, the game is pretty much won from this point, but that misplay almost ended up costing me the game. In the end though, I do cast Miraculous Plague 1 turn later than I should have, and from here on it's just an easy victory. And game 3 was just a complete train wreck. I had no turn 2 play, no Bronze Arm Tribe, no relevant triggers, I just had nothing. It was just a swift, brutal loss, and with this 1-2 defeat I am officially knocked out of the tournament. So yeah, game 3 was a stomp, but I think the match in general was pretty close. I mean, game 1 I could have easily won if just something went ever so slightly more right. But I mean, even if I had won this match, in the finals I would have had to play FN Rush again. And objectively speaking, beating FN Rush twice with this deck is just not a realistic scenario. It can happen of course, 18% of the time to be exact, if my stats are to be believed, but it's just not something that you can expect. So overall, given my matchups in top 4, I'd say I'm pretty happy with 3rd place. Alright, I haven't shown you the 3rd place match yet. It's once again against Spoding Survivors, which we beat 2-0 in group stages, and honestly, after those games I was feeling pretty confident here. The matches seemed quite easy, and indeed it turns out that they were. I just saw them fast forwarded here in the background because there's not much interesting happening and it's just kind of a stomp. After the games, even my opponent typed in chat that the matchup feels unwinnable, which is somewhat surprising because Standard Survivors has a pretty good matchup against Standard Fortress, but I would say that these were both quite non-standard lists, so who knows.
And that's it. That's the whole tournament report. Every single match I played in IDC41. This video took a lot of time to make and honestly, I don't expect that many people to be interested in this type of content. But if you are interested and would like to see more, do let me know in the comments. Have a great day, duelists, and see ya!